Hey guys, welcome to the first educational video that I will be releasing. Today we'll be discussing food safety basics, how to handle food properly so that you don't get yourself rather sick. We're going to start with one of the main principles, and the simplest principle probably is first in, first out, or FIFO. What this means is if you bought a product first and then you buy another of that product, you use up the older product first. So if you bought a case of chicken wings on Monday, it's almost empty, so you order more for Wednesday. A new case comes in. They go on the same shelf. So what you would do is take the case from Wednesday, put it on that same shelf behind the case from Monday, so you make sure that everyone uses that case from Monday up first. It's the easiest way to go about doing it. Usually when you're ordering cases from anywhere, they're going to have dates right on it, and so will any product you get from a grocery store aside from produce. But anything that you prepare, you should still use date stickers yourself. And if date stickers aren't available, the easiest thing is green masking tape and a Sharpie. Just right on it. I do it at home even. It's really simple, and you get to see how old something is. And that doesn't always tell you if something's necessarily expired, but it's going to give you a better idea. I mean, there's certain things, hey, past 3 days, get rid of it. I'm not using it. For instance, I would say chicken. If I bought it from a grocery store, after 3 days, I know I've got to give it a test, and possibly it's either getting cooked that day or it's gone. I'm not going to risk it. If you if you are worried at all about using a product, do not use it. Do not use it for a customer. It's not worth the risk. You might lose a little bit of money, but you'll lose way more if you get somebody sick. In this industry, word of mouth is the number one thing. And if you get people sick, it spreads fast. I've seen many restaurants close because they're just too cheap to throw shit out. And all of a sudden, it spreads like wildfire that they are known for food poisoning and not handling their product properly. Now, shelving. This is going to be, again, probably pretty common sense for a lot of people, but you should put whatever has the most contamination and bacteria starting at the bottom. So you would go poultry, pork, beef, fish, produce in that order from bottom to top. Now, I would recommend having completely separate shelving units if you have the space for it, if you're in a restaurant. Um, but most people aren't going to have that, and obviously just their home kitchen. And if you're just getting into this and just getting into catering, you're probably just going to have that one fridge. Maybe you find a cheap second fridge that you're able to keep just for your jobs. And either way, you're not going to have much room for storage, so you should store it in that order. And whatever you're storing should also still be in a tight package, like in a sealed packaging, whether that's in a plastic bin, whether that's in a Ziploc, doesn't really matter. But even your produce, if it's on top, it might not contaminate what it falls onto, but you still want to protect it just from even the flavors of the fridge or from it drying out. There's very few times you wouldn't want to cover something, and it'd be because you're looking for a specific effect, such as if you were drying out chicken, you wouldn't wrap it. You wouldn't do anything. You just want the skin to get drier. So whether it's frying up crispier or your oven roasting it, maybe you leave it overnight without the wrap on for that specific reason. But that's very particular cases, and you're going to know that you're doing that, and you should still take other precautions to keep that food safe from other contamination when you do that. Now, for your fridges, every fridge is going to be set properly soon as you take it home. Very rarely will your refrigeration have an issue. Either something will have had to have broken down, you kept it open way too long, or you put something way too hot in there. So if you took a pot of boiling water and put it into your average, just, home refrigerator that is what, 2 by 2 by 4, something along those lines, you're going to bring the temperature up, and it's going to go up warm enough to where you're in a danger zone in terms of the growth of bacteria. Bacteria is going to grow extremely fast in there, and it can cause things to spoil quite rapidly, which we do not want. That is why if you have something like that, a soup, a stock, whatever it may be, you You want to bring it down to temperature as fast as you really can before you put it in the fridge. And when it comes to super stock, like I'll definitely err on the safe side of it cooling out of the fridge longer because you're going to bring it up to a boil the next day anyways. Unless you left it out like, overnight to the point where there's excessive bacteria and the shit is just spoiled rotten, you're most likely going to kill off all bacteria just by boiling it. There's very few instances where that's not going to be the case. And of course, your freezers got to be cold enough to keep food frozen. You don't just want it close to freezing. You don't want it like -2, -3, because stuff will actually start to kind of almost thaw. Like if you've ever reached into a freezer that felt a little too warm, maybe at a convenience store or something, because it's a really hot day, it's older equipment, and the ice cream feels almost malleable a little bit inside the carton, that's because it's not cold enough. Even though it's frozen, it's not frozen solid. There is a difference there. So you want to keep it at 18 degrees, sorry, -18 degrees Celsius or 0 degrees Fahrenheit or colder for that specific situation. And then for your refrigerated stuff, you want it 4 degrees Celsius or lower, but not quite frozen if you can avoid that. All right, let's move to the next slide. So preparing food safely, the number one cause of any kind of foodborne illness is cross-contamination. That happens in one of many possible ways. Typically, it's going to be someone either not washing and sanitizing their hands or possibly not changing gloves if you work with gloves and so you don't wash your hands. I usually just work with my hands because I know I'm going to wash my hands every single time. It's a habit I've had. It's a habit I'm always going to have. Whereas when you go into a lot of places where people use gloves, you'll see them not change their gloves very often. I've been in places to see it because people think, oh, my hands aren't dirty, and they just keep working with it. You go to a Subway, I've seen people using their gloves. They make one sandwich, and by the way, with that glove, they reach into every single different item. So it's definitely cross contamination already that way. Not that you're likely to get somebody sick with the stuff that they're working with in that way. But then where it gets nasty is they keep the gloves on, grab your cash, and then go on and make the next sandwich. Now, some people are better and they make sure to change it, but you'll see it often enough to know that it is risky. If you're smart enough yourself and you prefer gloves, just wear gloves. That's your preference. That's no big deal. I just prefer to use my hands and wash them and sanitize them properly. Every time, guys. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. The second you switch the type of product you are working with, or you handled money, or you scratched your face just out of a habit, anything where you're not touching that food or the clean utensils you're using for that food, you need to wash and sanitize your hands. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Customers notice this type of thing, especially if you're in an open kitchen or if you're catering on site. Customers will notice and they will not want to hire you back if they think that you're some kind of gross person. I don't know how, that's probably not the most proper term to use, but if they don't see you practicing good hygiene and having good habits when it comes to keeping your station clean and keeping the food clean, they're not going to hire you back. Whereas if you are on top of it, you're organized and you're clean, that's something that they like to see. It gives them peace of mind seeing you washing your hand all the time and keeping the place clean. They think that you're professional because, well, you are. You're trying to keep them safe and yourself safe too. Wash all of your fruits and vegetables. Now, this might be different from place to place. There could be places where there's regulations that they can't put any kind of pesticides on vegetables or fruits at all, or they can't spray them so that they last longer when they are traveling, or maybe places actually wash them. But if you're buying from a grocery store, at least in Canada, wash them thoroughly. Like there could be dirt on there. Like I said, they spray them with different materials so that they last longer. So a lot of times in Canada, I mean, we have harsh winters, depending on where you live. They're shipping these things from Mexico or sometimes Puerto Rico or even Cuba and California. So they're traveling long distances and they have to find a way to preserve that fruit longer than it typically would last. One of the techniques, they definitely pick the fruit early and it ripens off fine. which is why it's not great produce typically. Um, but even if it weren't, you get it from a local farmer's market, it's not sprayed with anything, it's still probably going to be pretty dirty. You do not want to eat dirt. It's a bad habit for you to have, and your customers don't want to eat dirt either. So always wash them. Your knives, your utensils, your cutting board, same thing. It's going to sound like a broken record. Wash and sanitize, especially once you start to switch products. Now, ideally, you have separate cutting boards. That would be the best situation possible, and you wash and clean them as you go. But you have one for produce, one for beef, one for pork, one for poultry. That would be ideal. Now, not a lot of people, especially when you're just starting out, are going to have that. But go invest in at least one, preferably two, really good plastic cutting boards. I recommend plastic because you can wash them a lot more thoroughly than wood without them getting ruined. Wood will soak it up. Wood also will soak up bacteria and eventually crack. Wood is good for very few things when it comes to a cutting board. A lot of people, worry about plastic damaging their knives. If you take care of your knife and keep it sharp, it's not going to do a goddamn thing to your knife. Over time, your knife is going to wear down from you sharpening it more than it's going to from you cutting on a plastic surface. It's just not going to be an issue. Now, if you have two cutting boards, at least you can keep produce separate from your meat right away, which would be awesome. But if you can't, no matter what, same as refrigeration storage, start with the stuff that has the least amount of bacteria. That way, it's not just about just the cutting board, but you could be spreading bacteria in your work area itself, where you're setting your knives down, et cetera, et cetera. Stuff splashes that you're not going to be able to see. It's just a little bit safer. Are you likely to get sick because there's like a little microbe that possibly splashed off it somewhere onto your stainless steel table where bacteria can hardly live anyways? It's unlikely, but it's just an extra step of precaution that you should take. So same thing, but you go from the top down, you go produce, fish, beef, pork, chicken. So on top of that, just always wash and sanitize every single utensil in between any different product. Now, this is what I want to mention here at the bottom that is going to definitely depend on where you live and what the regulations are. Washing your protein. I know that this is a very big thing in certain parts of the world where they don't have the strictest laws around food production. In Canada, it's pretty safe. Those things are sprayed down in the facilities. They're vacuum packed. I'm talking about beef right now. And then for chicken, they're cleaned thoroughly and sprayed with water containing bleach. That is why the skin is white when you get it here. Skin of chicken is not white. It's yellowish. If you've ever watched a video of someone parting either a pasture-raised chicken or like you go to France or watch a French cooking video, the chicken has yellow skin. It's yellowish. It's not white, but somehow it's bleach white when you get it in Canada. That's because it's washed with water and diluted bleach. Now, I get it. There's some people that practice this anyways, washing it. The risk that you run, unless you have a good, clean, open space that you can wash speckless after, is you're more likely to just splash up any salmonella, if there is any on that chicken, to your work area. It's going to get all over because the running water dropping down, the water takes place, and the juice of the chicken splash up. It's like if you ever worked in chemistry class, they want you to pour whatever the least harmful mixture is in first. So if you're doing bleach and water, you do water first and then pour your bleach in. So if anything splashes, it's going to be the water coming out, not the bleach. The bleach sinks down while the water comes out. Same thought here. Now, I know some people are going to want to practice anyways because it's just what they've grown up doing and it's what they believe is safe. And it does affect the flavor of the meat a little bit because you're definitely taking off some of the flavors with either the myoglobin. The other part is, for instance, with chicken, your skin's not going to get as crispy, and that might not be the end of the world for some people, but I prefer not to. The other part too is if you wash it right before doing something like deep frying, it's going to be a lot more dangerous. That in mind, do whatever you think is best for where you are living and the specific situation that you are in. Next, we're going to talk about cooking safely. And these temperatures are according to food safety guidelines. These are not my personal preference. This is how you need to be cooking them, at least in Canada. There's probably places with easier regulations on this. Canada is very strict when it comes to cooking food, and it's one of the reasons there's not much for foodborne illness or any kind of food poisoning here at all. You very rarely hear of it, and when you hear of it, it's because someone really, really, really fucked up. Maple Leaf about 20 years ago, somebody didn't clean the slicer properly and hadn't for a long time. They kept not washing a meat slicer properly. That stuff spread like wildfire, sorry. And they hammered down on everybody else. Maple Leaf still got it, but we're a very small butcher company. We're maybe 3,000 square feet, the size of our store. We were forced to $100,000 in renovations about a month and a half after because they got so much more strict on everyone else after that big of an event happened. Does that happen everywhere? No, I mean, I'm not from the States, so I don't know enough on this, but it seems like I've heard about Flint, Michigan having bad water for, I don't know, my whole life. So different places will crack down a lot quicker and harder. And there's pros and cons to that. Pros being obviously people not getting sick, but the cons could be, a less enjoyable meal for certain things. Here, hamburger you can't have. You can't have a ground hamburger medium. You can't even have it medium well. You can only have it well done unless you're cooking for yourself. So, and I recommend not going lower than medium if you're buying it from somewhere that you don't really know. The reason for that is bacteria could be around like the outside of every little granule. With a steak, you've got it around the surface area that you're going to cook way above the temperature anyways. The inside is going to be, rare, medium rare, however you like it. It's not going to contain anywhere near as much bacteria, or at least have way less of a risk of holding the amount of bacteria that the outside can contain. So with that in mind, let's kind of start from the beginning here. As always, I want to drill it into you guys. Make sure the utensils you're using for cooking are clean, and you should have separate utensils. One for completely raw product that you're putting on, and others for the cooked product that you're taking off. You can also just wash the same item. We find like if you use a tong to put 20 racks of raw ribs onto a barbecue, you go and wash and sanitize that, and then you use that same tong to flip them. You wash and sanitize that, and then you use that tongs to remove them safely once they're properly cooked. Otherwise, I'd just recommend one that's raw, and while it's still semi-raw, so even for the flipping process, and then you would use the cooked tongs to remove the product safely. Now, talking about cooking temperatures, pasteurization definitely can happen at different temperatures and different lengths of time. Canada doesn't really work like that in terms of how they want you to cook it. It needs to be according to the thermometer, straight up cooked, no matter what. So beef is one where you actually can serve raw. They don't require any specific temperature to do it unless it's ground beef. For whatever reason, it's hilarious because I can thin shave 3 pounds of carpaccio that's just as risky probably as ground beef, except for the fact that it's not going through a grinder, but instead it's on a slicer, which we just discussed how plenty of people got sick from a dirty slicer. I can serve that. That's not an issue here. And I like beef carpaccio, so I'm not saying, hey, don't eat beef carpaccio, but if it's kind of a weird way that they go about regulating it. So I don't really recommend eating that, at least not often, because of the fact that, well, you can eventually get worms if you do it all the time. And I also wouldn't recommend doing it unless you trust your butcher or you trust where you're really getting it from. I would not go to, Walmart or Costco or Sam's Club or wherever you typically get your food from and take one of their steaks and go and shave it raw and eat it. I'm not going to risk that. I don't trust however they keep it. I don't like, you've got a kid getting paid, like your minimum wage is $16 an hour. So they're getting paid $16 an hour, not giving a fuck to move this food around and treat it properly. Not worth the risk. Um, I run a butcher shop, so I'm very fortunate in this regard. I get to see how that food is treated. I know my suppliers directly. I literally get to take a temperature gun and see the temperature of the delivery truck when it comes with my delivery. I get to take the temperature of the delivery, do one or two boxes. It's probably going to be pretty accurate for the rest of them. Move it into my cooler that I know is running at a proper temperature. Get to work at my own clean space and slice it how I want it right away. Now, again, ground beef, I do still recommend cooking it further, particularly from grocery stores and stuff. They could have wound up having to grind something else and not just beef, right? There could be pork in there that, although nowadays you don't have to worry about cooking as much as you used to, I still think it's worth cooking the beef to like a medium to make sure it's pasteurized. Pork in Canada, anyways, needs to be cooked to a minimum of 160 degrees. Now, you can technically pull it off before that temperature if at some point you can probe it to that temp. So let's just say you pulled it off at 145 instead and tented it, and through the continuous cooking of the residual heat, it hits 160 degrees. If it hits that temperature mark for 11 seconds in Canada, then it's safe. It's safe to serve, and that is for restaurants is what you have to do basically. There are other ways of pasteurizing, such as a sous vide is a fantastic way because you can keep it at a specific temperature long enough to kill off any bacteria. Um, but Canada doesn't want that. You could probably typically get away with it because nobody's going to get sick. But I I would say not to mess around with those things when you're first starting out. Um, I at home, if it's a pork chop or a pork tenderloin, I'm cooking that thing to like 135 before I pull it off because it's gonna finish at probably 145, 150 when I tent it. So it's got a little bit of pink in the middle, but pork just dries out so goddamn much unless you're using, the shoulder or the hams and the hocks and the feet. But basically, anything in the middle, it's for the muscles anyways. They're gonna dry out pretty easily. Poultry is definitely the one that people are scared about the most, and I get why. It is the most common food to get any kind of foodborne illness with, although salmonella is probably the least dangerous one. I'd say E. coli is by far the most dangerous, that at least that I know of, not counting botulism, but that'll be a different topic that we need to discuss because that isn't just like a cross contamination thing. That is in a lot of things would have went wrong. Typically it'd be with like pickling or preserving foods, not having the curing salt or any salt done properly, not canning properly, not bringing it to enough heat, having the wrong pH level. There's a lot on that one, which we can discuss in another video. But in terms of just cooking, you need to get chicken to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, okay, with a thermometer probed for at least 11 seconds. Why? Why 11 seconds? I don't know. I have had my food handler certificate for 17 years now. Turned 32. Got it when I was 15. It used to be once 160, then 165, then 170. And for the advanced FSD, they say specifically 171 for 11 seconds. I put 170 degrees here because if you cook it to 170 degrees, you pull that off, that sucker's hitting 185. It's like you do not have to worry about that thing having an ounce of any kind of bacteria in it unless, as we discussed before, it was spoiled beforehand, which in any case you shouldn't be cooking. Don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah, that pretty much does it in terms of food safety basics. There's definitely more that we could discuss, but I'll leave that for future videos, such as the botulism. That is something that I'll bring up probably in the pickling video, because that's where you're going to see it more often than not, is things like that, or a place doing heavy smoking like pepperettes or sausage or something like that, that they didn't cure it properly. So thank you so much if you watched this video. I would really appreciate it if you could leave any kind of feedback, good or bad. Things that you enjoyed, things that you would like to see, things that you didn't enjoy and you think could be improved on. There's definitely a few things that I think I could improve on, but it is my first video, and I still want to hear other people's opinions because you're going to see stuff that I don't see, right? So thanks again, guys. Stay awesome.